The storm clouds rolled over Silvercreek, Colorado, like a dark omen as Abigail Lancaster stepped off the eastbound train. Her wedding dress soaked through within minutes of standing on the platform. The year was 1879, and she had traveled all the way from Boston with dreams of a new life, only to find herself abandoned in the pouring rain, her intended husband nowhere to be found. Abigail clutched the crumpled telegram in her gloved hand, the ink beginning to run from the raindrops. "Meet me at Silvercreek Station, April 16th, 2 o'clock sharp." Yet here she stood, the station clock showing 3:30, her trunk at her feet, and not a soul to greet her except the bored-looking station master who had already begun closing up for the day. "Miss, we're shutting down soon." "Train's gone," the station master called out, barely glancing at her as he secured the ticket window. "You got somewhere to go?" Abigail's lower lip trembled. I was to be met by my fiancé, Mr. Jonathan Wells." The station master's face changed then, a flicker of recognition followed by something that looked uncomfortably like pity. "Wells, you say, from over at Copper Ridge?" She nodded eagerly. "Yes, that's him. Do you know where I might find him?" The man scratched his beard. "Miss, I don't know how to tell you this, but Jonathan Wells got himself married 3 weeks ago to the Miller girl from over the ridge." The world seemed to stop as the rain pounded harder around her. Abigail's throat tightened, making it nearly impossible to breathe. 3 weeks ago. But his last letter, promising to make her his bride, had been sent just a month before. "There must be some mistake," she whispered, but the station master was already retreating into his office, eager to be done with the day and the awkward situation. Left alone on the platform with night approaching, Abigail felt the first tears mixing with the raindrops on her face. Her entire future, carefully planned and saved for, was dissolving like the ink on her telegram. She had sold everything she owned in Boston, severed all ties, and now stood abandoned in a strange town with nowhere to go. The sound of horses and wheels splashing through mud drew her attention to the road alongside the station. A wagon pulled by 2 sturdy chestnuts came to a halt, and a tall figure in a duster and wide-brimmed hat jumped down, seemingly unbothered by the downpour. "You waitin' on someone, madam?" A deep voice called out as the stranger approached, boots heavy on the wooden platform. Abigail quickly wiped at her tears, though it was a futile gesture in the rain. "I was, but it appears I've been mistaken." The man stepped closer, and beneath the brim of his hat she could make out sharp blue eyes and a strong jawline dusted with stubble. He took in her sodden wedding dress, the trunk at her feet, and understanding dawned on his weathered face. "You're the bride from back east," he said, not a question but a statement. "Wells' bride." Abigail's surprise must have shown on her face because the man's expression darkened. "Word travels fast in small towns," he explained, then extended a gloved hand. "Xavier Blackwood. I run the Double B Ranch about 5 miles outside of town." "Abigail Lancaster," she replied automatically, barely touching his hand before withdrawing her own. "And yes, I was to be Mr. Wells' bride, but it seems he's found another." Xavier Blackwood's jaw tightened. "John Wells never did have much honor," he muttered. He looked at her, then at the darkening sky, then back to her again. "You got family here? Anyone to go to?" Abigail shook her head, the reality of her situation becoming more desperate by the second. Xavier seemed to make a decision then, squaring his shoulders. "Miss Lancaster, I don't mean to be forward, but that storm's only getting worse, and you can't stay here." He gestured to his wagon. "You're meant to ride in my wagon tonight. I can take you to the Widow Thornton's boarding house in town. It's respectable, and she'll look after you until you figure things out." Something in his steady gaze gave Abigail courage. This was not how her new life in the West was supposed to begin, but she had nowhere else to turn. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood," she said, straightening her spine despite the weight of her sodden dress. "I would be most grateful." Xavier nodded, picking up her trunk with ease. "Call me Zav." "Everyone does." He loaded her trunk into the wagon, then held out a hand to help her up. As Abigail settled onto the wooden seat, Xavier threw a thick blanket around her shoulders. The wool smelled of horses and hay, but it was dry and warm, and she clutched it gratefully. "It ain't Boston," Xavier said as he flicked the reins, setting the horses in motion, "but Silvercreek's got good people. Mostly." He glanced at her from under his hat. "And whatever that fool Wells did, it ain't a reflection on you." Abigail stared straight ahead at the rain-soaked road, wondering how her life had taken such a dramatic turn in the span of a single afternoon. "I appreciate your kindness, Mr. Blackwood Zav," she said quietly. "I won't forget it." He didn't respond, but something in the set of his shoulders told Abigail that Xavier Blackwood was a man of his word, unlike the one who'd brought her to this desperate situation in the first place. The wagon lurched forward into the stormy evening, marking not the end of Abigail's dreams, but, though she couldn't know it yet, the beginning of something far more profound than she had ever dared to imagine. The Widow Thornton's boarding house stood on the east end of Silvercreek's Main Street, a two-story clapboard building with lace curtains in the windows and a welcoming light shining from within despite the storm. Xavier helped Abigail down from the wagon, careful to steady her as her feet sank into the mud. "Wait here under the awning," he instructed, guiding her to the relative shelter of the porch. "I'll fetch your trunk and speak to Mrs. Thornton." True to his word, Xavier carried her trunk with ease before knocking firmly on the door. Moments later, it swung open to reveal a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked dark hair pulled into a tight bun. Her eyes widened at the sight of Abigail's bedraggled form. "Mercy, child. You're soaked to the bone," she exclaimed, ushering Abigail inside before turning to Xavier. "What's this about Blackwood?" "This is Miss Abigail Lancaster," Xavier explained, removing his hat as he stepped into the foyer. "She arrived on the afternoon train expecting to meet Jonathan Wells." Understanding immediately registered on Mrs. Thornton's face. "Oh, you poor dear," she said, clucking her tongue. "That no-good Wells boy. Come in, come in. Let's get you out of those wet clothes before you catch your death." "I can pay for lodging," Abigail said quickly, reaching for the reticule attached to her wrist. "I have some money saved." Mrs. Thornton waved her off. "We'll discuss that once you're dry and fed. Mr. Blackwood, you can leave the trunk there. I'll have my son bring it up when he returns." Xavier nodded, then turned to Abigail. "Miss Lancaster, I'll call on you tomorrow to see how you're settling in. Perhaps you'll allow me to show you around Silvercreek." Before Abigail could respond, Mrs. Thornton answered for her. "That would be most appropriate. The poor girl needs to know what sort of town she's found herself in." She gave Xavier a meaningful look. "You'll join us for supper tomorrow evening, Mr. Blackwood, 6 o'clock sharp." A ghost of a smile passed over Xavier's features. "Wouldn't miss your cooking, Mrs. Thornton." He placed his hat back on his head and nodded to Abigail. "Until tomorrow, Miss Lancaster." After he departed, Mrs. Thornton wasted no time in whisking Abigail upstairs to a small but clean room. "You get out of those wet things," she instructed, pulling a cotton nightgown from a chest. "I'll bring up some hot water and tea. We can see about laundering your dress in the morning." Left alone, Abigail sank onto the edge of the bed, the events of the day finally catching up to her. She had traveled nearly 2,000 miles to marry a man who had already taken another bride. She was alone in a strange town with only a handful of dollars to her name. And yet, inexplicably, she did not feel entirely lost. The kindness of a stranger, a rugged rancher with steady hands and eyes the color of the summer sky, had given her a sliver of hope. As she changed out of her ruined wedding dress, Abigail allowed herself a single moment of grief for the future she had imagined. Then, with the same determination that had carried her across the country, she resolved to face whatever tomorrow would bring. Morning came with clear skies and brilliant sunshine, as if the previous day's storm had never happened. Abigail rose early, having slept fitfully in the unfamiliar bed. Mrs. Thornton had provided her with a simple but clean dress to wear while her own clothing dried, left behind by a boarder who moved on, she'd explained, and Abigail was grateful to have something appropriate to wear. After a breakfast of cornbread and eggs shared with the other boarders, a schoolteacher, an elderly gentleman who worked at the bank, and a young widow with a small child, Abigail found herself sitting in Mrs. Thornton's cozy parlor, facing a decision about her future. "You have skills, girl," Mrs. Thornton asked directly, settling into her rocking chair with her mending basket. "Something you can turn to work," Abigail nodded, grateful for the practical question rather than more sympathy over her situation. "I was a teacher back in Boston. Reading, writing, arithmetic, history. I also play the piano and can speak a little French." Mrs. Thornton's eyebrows rose appreciatively. "Well, that's fortunate. Our school teacher, Miss Winters, is leaving at the end of the term to marry her beau in Denver. The town council's been looking for a replacement." Hope flickered in Abigail's chest. "Do you think they would consider me, even though I'm new to town?" "Honey, qualified teachers don't exactly grow on trees out here," Mrs. Thornton replied with a chuckle. "I'd say you have a fine chance, especially once they hear you're educated in Boston. The council meets this Friday. I'll have a word with Mayor Wilson beforehand." The sound of boots on the porch interrupted their conversation, and moments later, a knock came at the door. Mrs. Thornton's smile turned knowing as she rose to answer it. Xavier Blackwood stood on the threshold, looking markedly different from the night before. Gone was the rain-soaked duster, replaced by a clean white shirt, dark vest, and polished boots. His dark hair, still damp from what must have been a recent washing, was combed neatly away from his face. In one hand he held his hat, in the other a small bouquet of wildflowers. "Mr. Blackwood," Mrs. Thornton greeted him with barely concealed amusement. "Right on time." Xavier cleared his throat. "Mrs. Thornton, I've come to call on Miss Lancaster as promised." "Yes, I recall," she replied dryly. "Come in. She's in the parlor." Abigail rose as Xavier entered, surprised by the flutter of nervousness in her stomach. In the light of day, she could see him properly for the first time. He was tall, broad-shouldered from a life of physical labor, with sun-bronzed skin that spoke of long days outdoors. But it was his eyes that caught her attention again, a clear, striking blue that seemed to see right through pretense. "Miss Lancaster," he greeted her, extending the wildflowers. "I thought these might brighten your day. They're the first of the season." Abigail accepted the flowers, touched by the simple gesture. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood. They're lovely." "I thought perhaps you might like to see the town," he suggested. "It's not much compared to Boston, but it's home to those of us who live here." Mrs. Thornton interjected before Abigail could respond. "A fine idea. The fresh air will do you good, Abigail, and Mr. Blackwood knows everyone worth knowing in Silvercreek." With Mrs. Thornton's blessing serving as proper chaperonage, Abigail found herself walking alongside Xavier down Silvercreek's Main Street minutes later. The town was modest but bustling. A general store, a bank, a small hotel, 2 saloons, a church, and various other establishments lined the dirt road. "Town was founded in '63, Xavier explained as they walked. Silver mining brought the first settlers, but when the veins thinned out, folks turned to ranching and farming, more stable that way. "And your ranch, the Double B?" Abigail inquired, genuinely interested. A proud smile touched Xavier's lips. "Started with 20 acres and 6 head of cattle when my pa claimed the land in '65. Now we run close to 300 head on 2,000 acres. He glanced at her. "It's good land, creek running through it, plenty of grass for grazing." They paused outside the schoolhouse, a simple one-room building with a bell tower on top. "Mrs. Thornton mentioned the teaching position," Abigail said hesitantly. "Do you think the town would accept someone like me?" Xavier studied her face. "Someone like you." "You mean educated, well-spoken, and determined enough to cross the country on your own?" He shook his head. "Miss Lancaster, this town would be lucky to have you." His faith in her abilities, offered so matter-of-factly, warmed Abigail's heart. As they continued their tour, Xavier introduced her to shopkeepers and townspeople, many of whom regarded her with curious but friendly interest. No one mentioned Jonathan Wells directly, though Abigail caught a few sympathetic glances that told her the story of her arrival had indeed spread. Their final stop was the telegraph office, where Xavier waited outside while Abigail sent a message to her aunt in Boston, the only family she had left, informing her of her safe arrival and change in circumstances. As they walked back toward Mrs. Thornton's, Abigail found herself more at ease with Xavier than she would have thought possible after such a short acquaintance. There was something reassuring about his presence, a steadiness that made her feel anchored in this unfamiliar place. "Mr. Blackwood," she began, then corrected herself. "Xav, I want to thank you properly for your kindness yesterday. If you hadn't come along when you did." He shook his head. "Anyone would have done the same." "Perhaps," Abigail replied, "but it was you who did, and I am grateful." Xavier stopped walking, turning to face her directly. "Miss Lancaster, Abigail," she interjected with a small smile. "If I'm to call you Xav, you must call me Abigail." His eyes crinkled at the corners. "Abigail. I want you to know that regardless of how things work out with the teaching position or anything else, you have friends in Silvercreek now. You're not alone." The simple declaration, spoken with such quiet conviction, brought unexpected tears to Abigail's eyes. She blinked them away quickly, nodding her thanks when words failed her. Later that evening, as promised, Xavier returned to Mrs. Thornton's for supper. The meal was a lively affair, with the other boarders joining in conversations that ranged from local gossip to national politics. Abigail observed Xavier throughout the meal, noting how he listened more than he spoke, but when he did offer an opinion, others paid attention. As the evening drew to a close, Xavier excused himself, explaining he needed to return to the ranch before it got too dark. At the door, he turned to Abigail. "The town council meets at 2 o'clock on Friday at the mayor's office," he told her. "I'll come by with the wagon to take you if you'd like." "That would be very kind," Abigail replied, aware of Mrs. Thornton hovering nearby, making a show of straightening pictures on the wall. "Thank you." Xavier nodded, placed his hat on his head, and departed with a final smile that Abigail found herself thinking about long after he had gone. The days leading up to Friday passed in a blur of activity. Abigail spent her time helping Mrs. Thornton around the boarding house, exploring more of Silvercreek on her own, and preparing for her meeting with the town council. She drafted a letter outlining her qualifications and teaching philosophy, determined to present herself as professionally as possible. True to his word, Xavier arrived promptly at 1:30 on Friday, his wagon freshly washed and a matched pair of gray horses in the traces instead of the workhorses from before. He, too, was dressed for the occasion in what Abigail guessed was his Sunday best, a dark suit coat over his usual shirt and vest. "You look very nice," she told him as he helped her into the wagon, self-conscious in her own best dress, which Mrs. Thornton had helped her press to perfection. "Just trying not to embarrass you in front of the town fathers," he replied with a wink that sent an unexpected warmth spreading through her chest. The town council consisted of 5 men: Mayor Wilson, a rotund former banker with an impressive mustache; Reverend Hayes from the Presbyterian Church; Dr. Patterson, whose spectacles kept sliding down his nose; Mr. Griffith, who owned the general store; and Mr. Schultz, a German immigrant who operated the town's smithy. They received Abigail with formal politeness in the mayor's office, asking detailed questions about her education, teaching experience, and why she had chosen to come west. Abigail answered truthfully, though she glossed over the specifics of Jonathan Wells' betrayal, stating simply that her intended marriage had not worked out. "And do you intend to stay in Silvercreek, Miss Lancaster?" Reverend Hayes asked, peering at her over steepled fingers. "Teaching requires commitment, and rural postings can be challenging for those accustomed to city life." Abigail met his gaze steadily. "Reverend, I left everything I knew to come west. I did so because I believed in building a new life here. Those circumstances may have changed, but my determination has not. If given the opportunity, I would be committed to this school and these children for as long as you would have me." The men exchanged glances, and Mayor Wilson cleared his throat. "Well said, Miss Lancaster. The term ends in June and Miss Winters leaves immediately after. The new term begins in September. Would you be able to start then?" Joy bubbled up inside her. "You mean?" "The position is yours if you want it," Mayor Wilson confirmed, smiling at her obvious delight. "Salary is $40 a month, with lodging provided in the small cottage behind the schoolhouse. It's modest, but it has been kept in good repair." "I accept," Abigail said without hesitation. "Thank you, gentlemen. I promise you won't regret your decision." Outside, Xavier was waiting with the wagon, his expression carefully neutral until she emerged with a wide smile. "They offered me the position," she exclaimed, unable to contain her excitement. "I start in September." Xavier's face broke into a genuine grin. "I knew they would." "Congratulations, Abigail." Impulsively, she reached out and squeezed his hand. "Thank you for believing in me, for helping me see that there could still be a place for me here." His hand turned in hers, returning the pressure briefly before letting go. "This calls for a celebration," he declared. "Have you had a proper tour of the countryside yet? There's a spot by the creek I'd like to show you." With Mrs. Thornton's permission secured, and her knowing smile suggesting she approved of the outing, Xavier drove Abigail out of town, following a winding road that led through rolling grasslands dotted with wildflowers. In the distance, mountains rose against the horizon, their peaks still capped with snow despite the spring warmth in the valley. "It's beautiful," Abigail breathed, taking in the vastness of the landscape. "So different from Boston." "This is just the beginning," Xavier promised, guiding the horses down a smaller trail that led toward a copse of cottonwood trees. "Wait until you see it in the different seasons. Summer brings thunderstorms that light up the whole valley. Fall turns those aspens on the mountainside to gold. And winter," he chuckled. "Well, winter reminds us why we appreciate spring so much." They stopped near a creek that gurgled cheerfully over smooth stones. Xavier helped Abigail down from the wagon, then retrieved a small basket from beneath the seat. "Mrs. Thornton packed us a little something," he explained, leading her to a grassy spot beneath a spreading cottonwood. "Hope you don't mind dining al fresco." Abigail laughed, delighted by the thoughtfulness. It seems you and Mrs. Thornton had great faith in my interview. Xavier spread a blanket on the grass and set down the basket. Mrs. Thornton has faith in many things, he said cryptically, especially when it comes to new beginnings. The simple meal of cold chicken, bread, cheese, and apple tarts tasted better than any fancy dinner Abigail could remember. Perhaps it was the open air, or the company, or the sense of accomplishment that flavored every bite, whatever the reason. She found herself more relaxed and happy than she had been since arriving in Colorado. As they ate, Xavier told her more about his ranch and the challenges and rewards of raising cattle in the high country. Abigail, in turn, shared stories of her life in Boston, her years teaching at a girls' academy, and her decision to accept Jonathan Wells' proposal after a correspondence that had spanned nearly a year. "I thought I knew him," she admitted, picking at a blade of grass. "His letters were so thoughtful, so full of dreams for our future together. I never imagined he could." She trailed off, still unable to fully process the betrayal. Xavier was quiet for a moment. "Wells and I went to school together," he finally said. "He always had a way with words, but not much follow-through. Some men are like that, all talk, no substance." "And what kind of man are you, Xavier Blackwood?" Abigail asked softly, surprising herself with her boldness. His blue eyes met hers directly. "I try to be the kind who means what he says and does what he promises," he answered simply. "My pa taught me that a man's word is the measure of his worth." The directness of his gaze made Abigail's heart beat a little faster. There was something compelling about Xavier's honesty, about the unadorned way he presented himself to the world. No pretense, no flowery declarations, just straightforward truth. As the afternoon waned, they packed up the remains of their picnic and returned to the wagon. Xavier took a slightly different route back to town, pointing out landmarks and telling her the history of the valley. By the time they arrived at Mrs. Thornton's, the sun was beginning to set, painting the western sky in shades of gold and pink. "Thank you for today," Abigail said as Xavier helped her down from the wagon. "It was exactly what I needed." He kept hold of her hand a moment longer than necessary. "I'm glad you're staying in Silvercreek, Abigail," he said quietly. "It's a better place with you in it." Before she could respond, the boarding house door opened, and Mrs. Thornton appeared. "Ah, you're back. Perfect timing. Supper's almost ready and we want to hear all about the council meeting." As Abigail followed Mrs. Thornton inside, she glanced back to see Xavier watching her, his expression thoughtful. He tipped his hat to her before climbing back into the wagon, and Abigail carried the warmth of his smile with her for the rest of the evening. The next few weeks established a pattern that began to feel like a new normal for Abigail. During the day, she helped Mrs. Thornton with the boarding house chores, spent time with Miss Winters learning about the school and its pupils, and gradually became acquainted with more of Silvercreek's residents. In the evenings, she often found herself on the boarding house porch, watching the sunset and contemplating the strange turn her life had taken. Xavier called regularly, sometimes stopping by after attending to business in town, other times making a special trip just to see her. He brought her wildflowers, books he thought she might enjoy, and once, a kitten from a litter born in his barn to keep the mice away in your cottage, he explained, though they both knew the tiny calico was more likely to be a companion than a mouser. Abigail found herself looking forward to his visits, her heart lifting whenever she caught sight of his tall figure approaching. They talked about everything and nothing: her plans for the school, his ideas for expanding the ranch, their shared love of reading, their differing opinions on whether coffee should be served strong enough to stand a spoon in, Xavier's preference, or mellowed with cream, Abigail's choice. One Sunday in early May, Xavier invited Abigail to attend church with him, followed by dinner at his ranch. Mrs. Thornton, acting as Abigail's de facto guardian, gave her blessing with a knowing smile. "It's about time you saw where the man lives," she commented as she helped Abigail select an appropriate dress for the occasion. "A person's home says a lot about them." The Double B Ranch house stood on a gentle rise overlooking a valley where cattle grazed in the distance. Built of sturdy logs with a wide porch wrapping around two sides, it was larger than Abigail had expected, though still modest by Eastern standards. "My pa built the original cabin," Xavier explained as he helped her down from the buggy after church. "I added on the kitchen and extra bedrooms a few years back. Figured the place should grow as the ranch did." Inside, the house was simple but comfortable, with polished wooden floors covered here and there with braided rugs. The main room had a stone fireplace at one end, a dining table that could seat 8 at the other, and bookshelves lining one wall, a detail that immediately caught Abigail's attention. "You have quite a library," she remarked, running her fingers along the spines of leather-bound volumes. Xavier looked almost embarrassed. "Winter nights get long up here. Reading passes the time." The housekeeper, Mrs. Perez, a plump Mexican woman with a quick smile, had prepared a feast: roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and vegetables from the kitchen garden. As they ate, Xavier told Abigail more about the ranch operations, the challenges of the previous harsh winter, and his plans for breeding stronger cattle better suited to the Colorado climate. After the meal, Xavier took Abigail on a tour of the property. They visited the barn where sleek horses nickered in greeting, the calving pens where a new life had just entered the world that morning, and finally, a ridge overlooking the entire valley. "This is my favorite spot on the whole ranch," Xavier admitted as they stood side by side, taking in the panoramic view. "When things get difficult or decisions need making, I come up here to think." "I can see why," Abigail replied softly. "It feels like you can see forever from here." Xavier turned to face her, the breeze ruffling his dark hair. "Abigail, I know you've only been in Silvercreek a short time, and you came here with different expectations." He hesitated, then continued with characteristic directness. "But I find myself thinking about you even when you're not around. I look forward to seeing you more than anything else in my day." Abigail's heart quickened as she met his earnest gaze. "I feel the same way," she admitted, "which surprises me given how we met." A slow smile spread across Xavier's face. "Perhaps it was fate that brought you to that train platform in the rain." "Fate?" Abigail raised an eyebrow. "Or Jonathan Wells' dishonorable behavior?" Xavier laughed, the sound rich and warm. "Either way, I'm grateful." He took her hand in his touch gentle but sure. "I'd like to court you properly, Abigail Lancaster. With your permission." The question was so formal, so respectful of her agency after everything that had happened, that Abigail felt a surge of affection for this straightforward rancher who had come to mean so much to her in such a short time. "I would like that very much, Xavier Blackwood," she answered, squeezing his hand. The smile that lit up his face was worth all the disappointment and heartache that had led her to this moment. As they stood together on the ridge, with the vast Colorado landscape spread before them, Abigail felt a sense of rightness, of belonging, that she had never experienced before, not in Boston, and certainly not in her imagined future with Jonathan Wells. Here, with Xavier, she was beginning to find her true home. The summer months passed in a golden haze of long days and pleasant evenings. Abigail moved into the teacher's cottage behind the schoolhouse in early June, spending her days preparing for the upcoming term. She reviewed the existing textbooks, developed lesson plans, and with Xavier's help, repaired and repainted the desks and bookshelves that had seen better days. Her cottage, though small, became a cozy haven with Mrs. Thornton's contributions of curtains and quilts, Xavier's gift of bookshelves he'd built himself, and touches of her own personality gradually filling the space. The calico kitten, now named Harriet after Harriet Beecher Stowe, made herself thoroughly at home, alternating between fierce attacks on dust motes and long naps in patches of sunlight. Xavier's courtship was as straightforward as the man himself, no grand gestures or elaborate declarations, but consistent, thoughtful attention that made Abigail feel valued and cherished. He brought her freshly caught trout from the stream that ran through his property, helped her establish a small vegetable garden behind her cottage, and spent evening after evening on her porch, talking until the stars came out. As July turned to August, Abigail realized with some surprise that she had not thought of Jonathan Wells in weeks. The pain of his betrayal had faded, replaced by gratitude that his actions had ultimately led her to Xavier and a life that felt increasingly right. One warm evening, as they sat on her porch swing watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk, Abigail voiced this thought aloud. "It's strange to think that if Jonathan had met me at the station as planned, I would never have known you like this," she mused, her hand comfortably entwined with Xavier's. "I might have seen you in town occasionally, nodded in passing, but nothing more." Xavier's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "I've thought about that too," he admitted. "Wells and I were never friends exactly, but we've known each other since we were boys, when I heard he was bringing a bride from Boston." He paused. "Well, I'll just say I was skeptical, knowing his character. But I never imagined his dishonesty would bring you into my life." "Do you believe in Providence, Xav?" Abigail asked, watching a particularly bright firefly trace patterns in the air. He was quiet for a moment, considering. "I believe that good can come from bad situations," he finally said. "And I believe that sometimes things work out the way they're supposed to, even when it doesn't seem that way at first." He turned to face her directly. "Meeting you in the rain that day, that felt like Providence to me." The sincerity in his voice made Abigail's heart swell. Impulsively, she leaned forward and pressed a soft kiss to his cheek. "To me as well," she whispered. Xavier's eyes darkened as he looked at her, and for a moment Abigail thought he might kiss her properly. Instead, he raised her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "It's getting late," he said, his voice slightly rougher than usual. "I should head back to the ranch." Abigail nodded, understanding his restraint but feeling a flutter of disappointment nonetheless. Xavier was unfailingly respectful of her reputation, mindful that, as the town's new schoolteacher, she would be held to high standards of propriety. As he rose to leave, Xavier paused. "The harvest dance is coming up in 2 weeks," he said. "Would you do me the honor of accompanying me?" "I would love to," Abigail replied with a smile. He nodded, seeming pleased. "Good. That's good." He hesitated, then added, "My sister Amanda is coming to visit next week. She lives in Denver with her husband, but they try to come down a few times a year. I'd like for you to meet her." The request, so simple, yet so significant, warmed Abigail from within. Meeting Xavier's family was another step forward in their relationship, an acknowledgement of its growing seriousness. "I would like that very much," she told him. After Xavier left, Abigail remained on the porch swing, contemplating how thoroughly her life had changed in just a few months. The disappointment and humiliation of her arrival had transformed into contentment and hope. Silvercreek no longer felt like a place she had ended up by mistake, but a community where she belonged. And Xavier Blackwood had become the center of that belonging, the steadfast presence around which her new life revolved. It was too soon to name what she felt for him, too soon to imagine a future beyond the changing seasons, but Abigail knew with increasing certainty that whatever happened next, she wanted Xavier beside her. Amanda Blackwood Miller arrived at the Double B with her husband Thomas and their 2 young sons the following Wednesday. Xavier brought them to town on Thursday afternoon, making a special point to introduce Amanda to Abigail first, before conducting any other business. Amanda was several years younger than her brother, with the same striking blue eyes but a more outgoing personality. She embraced Abigail warmly, as if they were already family. "Zav's letters have been full of you," she confided as they walked together down Silvercreek's main street, the men following a few paces behind with the children. "I haven't seen him this happy in years." Abigail blushed. "He's been very kind to me since my arrival." Amanda laughed. "Kind? My brother is many things stubborn, direct, occasionally too serious for his own good, but kind is what he is to everyone. The way he looks at you is something else entirely." The observation made Abigail's heart flutter. "I care for him very much," she admitted quietly. Amanda squeezed her arm. "I can see that, and I'm glad." Her expression grew more serious. "Zav deserves someone who appreciates him for who he is, after what happened with Sarah." "Sarah?" Abigail couldn't help asking. Amanda bit her lip, glancing back at her brother who was deep in conversation with Thomas. "I probably shouldn't have mentioned her. It was a long time ago. Zav was engaged once, about 5 years back. She was from Denver, a banker's daughter who visited one summer. She accepted his proposal but changed her mind when winter came and she realized how isolated ranch life could be. She shook her head. Broke his heart, though he'd never admit it." The revelation gave Abigail a new perspective on Xavier's careful approach to their relationship, his emphasis on making sure she understood the realities of life in Silvercreek. He wasn't just being considerate of her recent disappointment. He was protecting himself from another rejection. That evening, the Millers and Xavier joined Abigail for dinner at her cottage. It was a lively affair, with the children's chatter and Amanda's animated stories about Denver society providing constant entertainment. Abigail found herself watching Xavier with new eyes, noting the quiet contentment in his expression as he observed his family and her together in her small home. After the meal, while Amanda helped Abigail clear the dishes, Thomas took the children outside to look at the stars, leaving Xavier alone in the sitting room. When Abigail returned, she found him examining the small, upright piano that had come with the cottage. "You play?" he asked, noticing her in the doorway. Abigail nodded. "I do, though I haven't had much chance since arriving. The piano needs tuning." "Would you play something anyway?" Xavier requested. "I've always liked music, though I have no talent for it myself." Unable to refuse him, Abigail sat at the piano and began a simple melody, a folk song her mother had taught her years ago. Despite the instrument's imperfections, the music filled the small cottage with warmth. When she finished, she turned to find Xavier watching her with an expression that made her breath catch. "That was beautiful," he said softly. "Thank you," she replied, equally quiet. "My mother taught me that song when I was very young. It's one of the few clear memories I have of her." Xavier moved to sit beside her on the piano bench. "You never speak much about your family." Abigail's fingers traced the worn ivory keys. "There isn't much to tell. My parents died of influenza when I was 8. I was raised by my aunt in Boston, my father's sister. She did her best, but she wasn't a warm woman." She smiled faintly. "That's partly why Jonathan's letters appealed to me so much. They were full of descriptions of family life, community, belonging. And now, do you feel you belong here?" Xavier asked, his question carrying weight beyond the simple words. Abigail met his gaze directly. I do, more than I ever expected to. Something shifted in Xavier's expression, a decision made. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he leaned forward and brushed his lips against hers, a question more than a kiss. Abigail answered by leaning into him, her hand coming up to rest lightly on his chest. The kiss deepened, gentle but thorough, and when they finally pulled apart, Abigail felt as though something fundamental had changed between them. No longer just courtship, but a promise of something more. The sound of the front door opening broke the moment, and they moved apart as Amanda and Thomas returned with the sleepy children. If Amanda noticed the heightened color in Abigail's cheeks or the way Xavier couldn't quite stop looking at her, she was kind enough not to comment. As the Millers prepared to leave, Xavier hung back. "I'll see you tomorrow," he asked quietly. "For the ride we discussed," Abigail nodded, still feeling the lingering warmth of his kiss. "I'm looking forward to it." After they left, Abigail moved around her cottage, extinguishing lamps and tidying up, her mind replaying the evening's events. As she prepared for bed, she caught sight of her reflection in the mirror, cheeks flushed, eyes bright, a smile she couldn't suppress curving her lips. She looked happy. She was happy. And for the first time since arriving in Silvercreek, Abigail allowed herself to think beyond the present moment, to imagine a future where evenings like this one weren't occasional treats, but the fabric of everyday life, a life shared with Xavier Blackwood. The thought should have frightened her after her experience with Jonathan, but instead, it filled her with quiet certainty. Xavier was nothing like Jonathan Wells. His actions matched his words. His character revealed itself consistently in everything he did. And most importantly, the feelings growing between them were based on genuine knowledge of each other, not romantic fantasies conveyed through carefully crafted letters. As Abigail drifted off to sleep that night, the memory of Xavier's kiss followed her into dreams far sweeter than any she had known before. The harvest dance was held in the town hall, a large room above the general store that served as Silvercreek's gathering place for important events. Decorated with autumn leaves, cornstalks, and golden bunting, the space had been transformed from its usual utilitarian appearance into something approaching festive. Abigail spent the afternoon preparing nervously, trying on and discarding several outfits before settling on a dress of deep blue that Mrs. Thornton assured her brought out the gold in her hair and would make a certain rancher's eyes pop right out of his head. Her hair she arranged in a more elaborate style than usual, with soft curls framing her face. When Xavier arrived to escort her, his appreciative gaze confirmed Mrs. Thornton's prediction. "You look beautiful," he said simply, offering her a small bouquet of late wildflowers mixed with sprigs of evergreen. "Thank you," Abigail replied, taking the flowers and inhaling their subtle fragrance. "You look very handsome yourself." And he did, dressed in a dark suit that emphasized his broad shoulders and lean waist, his hair neatly combed, his usually tanned face freshly shaved. The dance was already underway when they arrived. The local musicians, a fiddler, a guitarist, and an enthusiastic if not particularly skilled accordion player providing lively tunes that had couples spinning around the makeshift dance floor. Abigail recognized most of the faces now, having met many of Silvercreek's residents during her months in town. Several people greeted them as they entered, and Abigail was warmed by the genuine welcome she received. No longer the woman Wells left at the station. She was now Miss Lancaster, the new teacher, or simply Abigail to those she had grown closer to. Xavier led her to the dance floor without hesitation. "I should warn you," he said with a smile as he took her in his arms, "I'm not the most graceful dancer. Living on a ranch doesn't provide much opportunity for practice." "I'll take my chances," Abigail replied, placing her hand in his. Despite his warning, Xavier moved with the same confident ease he showed on horseback, guiding Abigail through the lively reel with only an occasional misstep. They danced several numbers in succession, both of them laughing and slightly breathless by the time they stopped for refreshments. As Xavier went to fetch them punch, Abigail found herself approached by Mayor Wilson's wife, a friendly woman who had been particularly welcoming since Abigail's arrival. "You two make a handsome couple," Mrs. Wilson commented, fanning herself after her own exertions on the dance floor. "It does my heart good to see Xavier Blackwood finally finding happiness. Such a fine man, the backbone of this community in many ways." "He is a good man," Abigail agreed, her eyes following Xavier across the room. Mrs. Wilson patted her arm. "And you're good for him, dear. Anyone can see that. Much better suited than that city girl who broke his heart a few years back." Before Abigail could respond to this second reference to Xavier's previous engagement, Mayor Wilson appeared to claim his wife for another dance. Left alone, Abigail continued to watch Xavier as he conversed with several men near the punch bowl, struck by how naturally he commanded respect without seeking it. Her contemplation was interrupted by an unwelcome voice at her elbow. "Miss Lancaster, I had heard you remained in town." Abigail turned to find herself face to face with Jonathan Wells for the first time since her arrival. He was much as she remembered from the single photograph he had sent her, handsome in a conventional way, with regular features and carefully pomaded hair. But now, instead of seeing the man she had imagined herself marrying, Abigail saw only a stranger whose actions had caused her considerable pain. "Mr. Wells," she acknowledged coolly. "Yes, I found Silvercreek to my liking after all." Jonathan shifted uncomfortably under her steady gaze. "I feel I owe you an explanation for what happened. Things with Mary, that is, Mrs. Wells, they developed very quickly. By the time I realized my feelings, your journey was already underway, and I had no way to contact you." The excuse was so flimsy, so clearly self-serving, that Abigail almost laughed. "You could have telegraphed the station in Denver, where the train stopped for several hours," she pointed out, "or any of the other major stops along the route. Instead, you left me to discover your betrayal upon arrival, alone and with nowhere to go." Jonathan at least had the grace to look ashamed. "It was poorly handled," he admitted. "I am sorry for any distress I caused you." "Any distress?" Abigail echoed, keeping her voice low despite her rising indignation. "Mr. Wells, you upended my entire life. I sold my possessions, resigned my position, and traveled thousands of miles based on promises you made with no intention of keeping." He flinched at her directness. "I did intend to keep them when I made them," he protested weakly. "Circumstances changed." "Yes, they did," Abigail agreed, her anger fading as she caught sight of Xavier returning with their drinks. "And I find myself grateful for that change, though not for the manner in which it occurred." Jonathan followed her gaze to Xavier, comprehension dawning on his face. "You and Blackwood, I had heard rumors, but I didn't believe." He trailed off, seemingly at a loss. "Is there a problem here?" Xavier asked as he reached them, his tone pleasant but with an underlying edge as he handed Abigail a cup of punch. "No problem," Abigail assured him, taking the cup and deliberately moving closer to Xavier's side. "Mr. Wells was just expressing his belated regrets for the way he handled our situation." Xavier's expression remained neutral, but Abigail felt the tension in him. "Is that so?" Jonathan straightened, clearly uncomfortable. "Blackwood." "Yes, I was apologizing to Miss Lancaster for any inconvenience I may have caused." "Inconvenience," Xavier repeated, the word hanging in the air between them. Sensing the rising tension, Abigail placed a hand on Xavier's arm. "Mr. Wells was just leaving," she said firmly. "Weren't you, Mr. Wells?" After an awkward moment, Jonathan nodded. "Yes. Good evening to you both." He departed quickly, disappearing into the crowd. Xavier watched him go, jaw tight. "I should have punched him the day you arrived," he muttered. Despite herself, Abigail laughed. "Violence wouldn't have helped the situation," she said, though the protective instinct behind his words warmed her. "Besides, seeing him now, I realize I never really knew him at all. His letters presented a version of himself that doesn't exist in reality." Xavier's expression softened as he looked down at her. "And what about me? Am I what you expected when you first met me in the rain that day?" Abigail considered the question seriously. "No," she finally answered. "You're far more than I could have expected. You're real, Xav, solid, true." She smiled up at him. "And a surprisingly good dancer." His laugh dispelled the last of the tension Jonathan's appearance had created. "Only because I have the right partner," he replied, setting aside their cups. "Speaking of which, I believe they're playing a waltz." "May I have this dance, Miss Lancaster?" "You may indeed, Mr. Blackwood," Abigail replied, allowing him to lead her back to the dance floor. As they moved together to the music, Jonathan Wells and his weak apologies faded from Abigail's mind. Here in Xavier's arms, with the warm light of lanterns overhead and the music surrounding them, she felt a certainty that had nothing to do with the fantasies she had once built around a stranger's letters, and everything to do with the man whose heartbeat she could feel beneath her hand. "Abigail," Xavier said softly, his breath warm against her ear, "there's something I've been wanting to tell you." She looked up at him, caught by the intensity in his blue eyes. "Yes." The music swelled around them as they continued to move in perfect unison. "I love you," he said simply, the words falling between them like a promise. "I think I have since that first day in the rain. I just didn't know it yet." Joy bloomed in Abigail's chest, spreading through her like sunshine. "I love you too, Xavier," she replied, the words feeling both momentous and completely natural. "With all my heart." His smile was like breaking dawn, slow, then brilliant. Without regard for the watching townsfolk, Xavier bent his head and kissed her, right there in the middle of the dance floor. It was brief but tender, a public declaration of private feelings. When they broke apart, Abigail was vaguely aware of a few cheers and some good-natured laughter from the crowd around them, but she couldn't bring herself to care about propriety in that moment. Not when Xavier was looking at her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "Shall we continue this conversation somewhere more private?" he suggested, his hand warm at the small of her back. Abigail nodded, and they made their way through the crowd, accepting congratulations and knowing smiles with grace. Outside, the autumn night was crisp and clear, stars scattered like diamonds across the velvet sky. They walked slowly toward Abigail's cottage, hand in hand, the silence between them comfortable and full of possibility. On her porch, Xavier turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "I meant what I said in there," he told her earnestly. "I love you, Abigail Lancaster. And if you'll have me, I want to spend the rest of my life showing you how much." Abigail's heart soared. "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" Xavier nodded, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I am. Though I had planned something more romantic than a proposal on your front porch after being provoked by Jonathan Wells." Abigail laughed, squeezing his hands. "This is perfect, Xav. You're perfect." "Is that a yes, then?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Yes," Abigail answered without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you, Xavier Blackwood." His answering smile was radiant as he pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet in an exuberant embrace, before setting her down to kiss her properly, a kiss that spoke of love, commitment, and a future brighter than either of them could have imagined when they first met on that rainy afternoon. The news of Xavier and Abigail's engagement spread through Silvercreek like wildfire, met with widespread approval and more than a few claims of "I knew it all along." Mrs. Thornton was particularly pleased, declaring that she had seen the match coming from the moment Xavier had brought a rain-soaked Abigail to her door. "It was written all over his face," she insisted, as she helped Abigail select fabric for a wedding dress. "That man was smitten from day one, though he tried to hide it behind all that proper concern." Abigail blushed, but couldn't deny the observation. Looking back, she could trace the development of their relationship through a series of small moments: Xavier's steady presence as she built her new life, his unwavering support, the gradual shift from friendship to something deeper. It had been a courtship based on genuine connection rather than romantic fantasy, and all the stronger for it. They decided on a December wedding, after the school term ended for the Christmas break. Xavier suggested waiting until spring when travel would be easier for guests coming from a distance, but Abigail was adamant. "I don't want to wait until spring," she told him as they sat before the fire in his ranch house one evening in late October. "Winter or not, I want to begin our life together as soon as possible." Xavier's smile was tender as he tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "I won't argue with that logic," he agreed. "December it is." The weeks leading up to the wedding were filled with preparations. Abigail divided her time between teaching and readying herself to become Mrs. Blackwood. Xavier, meanwhile, threw himself into expanding the ranch house, adding a larger kitchen, and a room he mysteriously referred to as a surprise for Abigail. November brought the first snow, transforming the landscape into a wonderland of white. Abigail, who had experienced plenty of snowy winters in Boston, nevertheless found herself enchanted by the pristine beauty of the Colorado mountains dressed in their winter finery. "It's different here," she explained to Xavier as they rode in his sleigh one Sunday afternoon, bundled in blankets against the cold. "In Boston, the snow turns gray almost immediately from the soot and traffic. Here it stays perfect." "Not always perfect," Xavier cautioned, ever practical. "Winter can be harsh in these parts, blizzards that last for days, temperatures that freeze a man's breath in his lungs." He glanced at her. "Ranch life in winter isn't easy, Abigail." She squeezed his arm through the layers of coats and blankets. "I know that, Xav. I'm not afraid of hard work or difficult conditions." She smiled up at him. "Besides, I'll have you to keep me warm." His answering laugh was interrupted by a shout from ahead. A rider was approaching rapidly, one of Xavier's ranch hands by the look of him, his horse kicking up plumes of snow. "Mr. Blackwood," the man called as he reached them. "Fire at the north pasture line shack. Lightning strike from that storm front moving in." Xavier's expression immediately shifted to alert concern. "Anyone hurt?" "No, sir, but it's spreading fast with the wind. Mr. Everett sent me to fetch you while he and the others try to contain it." Xavier nodded, already turning the sleigh around. "I'll drop Miss Lancaster at her cottage and join you directly." "No," Abigail interjected firmly. "Take me with you, I can help." Xavier hesitated, clearly torn between concern for her safety and the urgent need to address the fire. "It's dangerous, Abigail, and you're not dressed for firefighting." "Neither are you," she pointed out reasonably. "And 4 hands are better than 2. I'm stronger than I look, Xavier Blackwood." After a moment's consideration, Xavier nodded. "Stay close to me," he instructed, then flicked the reins, urging the horses to a faster pace. They reached the north pasture, to find chaos flames leaping high from what had once been a small cabin used by ranch hands when working far from the main house. Several men were battling the blaze with buckets of water and wet blankets, but the fire was winning, spreading to nearby trees despite the snow on the ground. Xavier jumped from the sleigh, issuing rapid instructions. Abigail followed, immediately joining a line of men passing buckets from a nearby stream to those fighting the flames directly. The work was grueling, the water icy, the smoke acrid, the heat from the fire intense despite the winter cold. For hours they fought the blaze, finally bringing it under control as dusk fell. Abigail worked alongside the ranch hands without complaint, her dress ruined, her face streaked with soot, her hands raw from the rough bucket handles and cold water. When the last of the flames were extinguished, leaving only smoldering ruins where the cabin had stood, Xavier found her helping to pack up the remaining equipment. "Abigail," he said, his voice a mixture of exhaustion and admiration. "You're incredible." She looked up, pushing back a strand of hair that had escaped her once neat bun. "I told you I could help," she replied with a tired smile. Xavier shook his head in wonderment. Most women would have insisted on being taken home, or at the very least stayed in the sleigh. "I'm not most women," Abigail reminded him, straightening despite her fatigue. "And I'll be a rancher's wife soon. Your concerns are my concerns, Xavier." He pulled her into his arms then, heedless of the watching ranch hands. "I love you," he murmured against her hair. "And I have never been more certain that I'm marrying the right woman." The ride back to town was quiet, both of them exhausted but sharing a deep sense of partnership that transcended words. When they reached Abigail's cottage, Xavier insisted on coming inside to build up her fire and make sure she was comfortable before returning to oversee the cleanup at the ranch. "I'll have to spend the night out there," he explained apologetically. "Make sure nothing flares up again and the men are all taken care of." "Of course," Abigail agreed, understanding the responsibilities that came with his position. "Will you come to town tomorrow?" Xavier nodded, dropping a kiss on her forehead. "Wild horses couldn't keep me away." He studied her face in the firelight. "Are you sure about this life, Abigail? Days like today will happen. Emergencies, hardships, times when the ranch has to come first." Abigail met his gaze steadily. "I'm sure about you, Xavier. Everything else we'll face together." His smile was tired but genuine as he reluctantly took his leave. Abigail watched from the doorway until his figure disappeared into the snowy darkness, her heart full despite the day's difficulties. The fire had been frightening, the work exhausting, but through it all, she had felt useful, necessary, part of something larger than herself. It was, she realized as she prepared for bed that night, exactly the kind of belonging she had been seeking when she first decided to come west, not the idealized version Jonathan Wells had painted in his letters, but the real thing, with all its challenges and rewards. And at the center of that belonging was Xavier Blackwood, the man who had found her in the rain and shown her what true love looked like. December 15th dawned clear and cold, the sun casting long shadows across the freshly fallen snow. Abigail stood at her cottage window, watching the golden light transform the ordinary street into something magical. Today was her wedding day, and despite the chill in the air, warmth filled her from within. Mrs. Thornton arrived early, bringing with her Amanda Blackwood Miller, who had traveled from Denver with her family for the occasion. The women bustled around Abigail, helping her dress, arranging her hair, and providing a steady stream of advice, both practical and personal, about married life. "You'll be perfect," Amanda assured her, securing the last pearl button on Abigail's gown, a creation of ivory satin with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. "Xav won't know what hit him when he sees you walking down that aisle." "If we ever get her there," Mrs. Thornton interjected practically. "The snow's picking up again, and we don't want to be late to your own wedding, child." Indeed, looking out the window, Abigail could see that the earlier clear skies had given way to clouds, with fat snowflakes beginning to drift lazily downward. Rather than feeling concerned, however, she found the snow fitting a reminder of the day Xavier had taken her sleigh riding, and she had proven herself during the fire. A knock at the door announced the arrival of Mayor Wilson, who had offered to escort Abigail to the church in his enclosed carriage. "Ladies," he called through the door, "the Reverend sends word that we should start soon. Weather's turning faster than expected." With final adjustments to her veil and bouquet winter evergreens mixed with dried flowers preserved from summer, Abigail was ready. Mrs. Thornton wrapped her in a hooded cloak lined with fur, and together they made their way to the waiting carriage. The short journey to the church passed in a blur of swirling snowflakes and nervous anticipation. By the time they arrived, the snow was falling steadily, creating a hushed atmosphere as Abigail was ushered into the church vestibule. Inside, the small church was transformed by evergreen boughs, red berries, and dozens of candles that cast a warm glow over the gathered townspeople. Music from the pump organ filled the space, a traditional wedding march played by Mrs. Patterson, the doctor's wife. As the familiar melody began, Abigail took Mayor Wilson's arm and began the walk down the aisle. Her eyes immediately found Xavier, standing tall and straight at the altar, his gaze fixed on her with an expression of such profound love that it nearly took her breath away. He was resplendent in a new black suit, his dark hair neatly combed, his face clean-shaven for the occasion. But it was the joy in his eyes that transformed him, making him the most handsome man Abigail had ever seen. The ceremony itself was brief but heartfelt. They exchanged traditional vows, their voices clear and certain in the hushed church. When Xavier slipped the gold band onto Abigail's finger, a simple ring that had belonged to his grandmother, his hands were steady, his touch gentle. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Hayes declared. "Mr. Blackwood, you may kiss your bride." Xavier's smile was radiant as he lifted Abigail's veil. "Mrs. Blackwood," he murmured, just for her ears, before claiming her lips in a kiss that promised a lifetime of love. The celebration afterward, held in the town hall, was jubilant despite the increasing snowfall outside. The entire community had contributed to the feast: roasted meats, winter vegetables, freshly baked breads, and a three-tiered cake that Mrs. Thornton declared her finest creation. Xavier and Abigail moved among their guests, accepting congratulations and well wishes, sharing dances and laughter. As the afternoon wore on, however, Xavier kept a weather eye on the windows, where the snow was now falling in earnest. "We should think about heading to the ranch soon," he told Abigail during a quiet moment. "That storm's settling in, and I want to get you home before the roads become impassable." Home. The word sent a thrill through Abigail. The Double B was her home now, and Xavier her husband. "Whatever you think best," she agreed, "though I hate to leave our guests." "They'll understand," Xavier assured her. "Weather like this, everyone knows to respect Mother Nature's timing." Sure enough, when they announced their departure, there were knowing nods and practical advice rather than disappointment. Goodbyes were said quickly, with Amanda extracting a promise that they would visit Denver in the spring, and Mrs. Thornton pressing a basket of food into Abigail's hands for later, when you're settled. The sleigh ride to the ranch was both exhilarating and intimate, the two of them bundled together beneath thick furs as the horses pulled them through the deepening snow. Xavier's arm around Abigail kept her warm, while the jingling of the harness bells provided a merry accompaniment to their journey. Not exactly the wedding day we planned, Xavier commented as they left the town behind, but fitting somehow. Abigail nestled closer to his side. It's perfect, she assured him. A winter wedding for a new beginning. When they reached the ranch, Xavier surprised Abigail by scooping her into his arms before she could step down from the sleigh. Tradition, he explained with a grin, carrying her across the threshold into the warmth of what was now their home together. Inside, the ranch house was transformed. Fresh evergreen boughs decorated the mantel, candles glowed in every window, and a fire roared in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across the polished wood floors. "Welcome home, Mrs. Blackwood," Xavier said softly, setting her on her feet but keeping his arms around her waist. Abigail's heart swelled with happiness as she looked around the cozy space. "It's beautiful, Xav. There's more," he told her, taking her hand. "Come see." He led her down the hallway to the mysterious room he had been adding to the house. Opening the door with a flourish, he ushered her inside. Abigail gasped. The room was a library, walls lined with bookshelves, a comfortable window seat overlooking the valley, and in the center, a gleaming piano. "Xavier," she breathed, moving to touch the instrument reverently. "How did you?" "Had it brought in from Denver," he explained, watching her reaction with evident pleasure. "Arrived last week. Do you like it?" "Like it, I love it," Abigail exclaimed, turning to embrace him. "But it must have cost a fortune." Xavier shrugged, his arms tightening around her. "Worth every penny to see that look on your face." He kissed her softly. "I want you to have music in your life, Abigail. Books, too. The ranch life is demanding, but that doesn't mean it can't also be beautiful." Tears of happiness pricked at Abigail's eyes. "You make it beautiful," she told him. "Just by being you." Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in pristine white. Inside the ranch house on the hill, Xavier and Abigail Blackwood began their life together, a life built not on fantasy or idealized romance, but on mutual respect, shared values, and a love that had grown from the unlikeliest of beginnings. As night fell and the storm raged, they found shelter in each other's arms, their passion tempered by tenderness, their bond strengthened by the journey that had brought them together. And Abigail, lying in her husband's embrace as the wind sang around the eaves of their home, reflected on the strange twist of fate that had left her abandoned at a train depot in the rain, only to lead her to this moment of perfect happiness. "What are you thinking about?" Xavier murmured against her hair, his voice husky with contentment. Abigail smiled in the darkness. "I was thinking about that day at the station," she admitted. "How devastated I felt and how certain I was that my future was ruined." Xavier's arm tightened around her. "And now?" She turned in his embrace to face him, tracing the beloved contours of his face with gentle fingers. "Now I know it was just beginning. The real future, not the one I imagined, but the one I was meant to have. With you." His kiss was her answer, a promise of all the days and nights to come, of a life built together through all seasons. Outside, the snow continued to fall, and inside, in the warmth of their embrace, Abigail and Xavier Blackwood found home in each other's hearts. Epilogue. 5 years later, the summer sun beat down on the Double B Ranch, turning the grasslands golden and warming the weathered boards of the expanded ranch house. From the wide front porch, Abigail Blackwood watched her husband lead their 3-year-old son, Benjamin, around the corral on a gentle pony. The little boy's laughter carried on the breeze, mingling with the sounds of cattle in the distance and chickens scratching in the nearby yard. 5 years had transformed the Double B. Under Xavier's careful management and Abigail's practical support, the ranch had prospered, growing to include new pasture land, improved breeding stock, and a reputation throughout the territory for quality and fair dealing. The house, too, had expanded to accommodate their growing family. Benjamin had been joined the previous year by a baby sister, Elizabeth, who now napped peacefully in her cradle in the shade of the porch. Abigail's life had found its rhythm teaching at the Silvercreek school during the term, helping with ranch operations during breaks, and always at the center, her partnership with Xavier, which had only deepened with the passing years. "Mama, look," Benjamin called, waving frantically as Xavier helped him stand on the pony's back. "I'm standing up. I see you, my brave boy," Abigail called back, her heart swelling with pride and love. "Hold on to Papa." Xavier's smile flashed across the yard, as warm and steady as it had been on the day they met. Some things had changed. A few strands of silver now threaded through his dark hair, and the responsibilities of fatherhood had added new dimensions to his character, but the essential Xavier remained the same: honorable, direct, and wholly devoted to his family. The sound of wagon wheels drew Abigail's attention to the road. A cloud of dust announced visitors well before she could make out the familiar figure of Mrs. Thornton beside her son in the driver's seat. "Company's coming," Abigail called to Xavier, who lifted Benjamin from the pony and set him on his shoulders for the walk back to the house. Mrs. Thornton, now in her 60s but still spry, descended from the wagon with a basket over her arm. "Thought you might appreciate some of my raspberry preserves," she announced as Abigail hurried to greet her. "Just put up the first batch yesterday." "You're a treasure," Abigail declared, embracing the older woman who had become like a mother to her over the years. "We were just about to have lemonade on the porch. Will you join us?" As they settled into rocking chairs, Benjamin clambering onto Xavier's lap while Elizabeth continued her peaceful slumber, Abigail was struck by the perfect contentment of the moment. This was the life she had been seeking all along, though she hadn't known it when she first boarded that eastbound train to meet a man she thought she loved. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Blackwood," Xavier said softly, reaching over to take her hand. Abigail smiled, squeezing his fingers. "I was just thinking how fortunate I am," she replied, "how everything worked out exactly as it should have." Mrs. Thornton snorted gently. "Providence," she declared with satisfaction, though it took a less than providential man to set it in motion. She had never forgiven Jonathan Wells for his treatment of Abigail, despite the fact that his actions had ultimately led to happiness. Xavier's thumb traced circles on Abigail's palm, a gesture that still sent warmth through her after all these years. "Speaking of Wells," he said casually, "I heard he's selling up and moving to California. Seems ranching didn't suit him after all." Abigail wasn't surprised. Jonathan had never been one for perseverance when difficulties arose. "I wish him well," she said sincerely. "Without his poor decisions, I might never have found my way here. To think, Mrs. Thornton mused, rocking gently. All of this," she gestured to encompass the ranch, the children, the life Abigail and Xavier had built, "because a bride was left at the depot in the rain and a cowboy said you're meant to ride in my wagon." Xavier's laugh was rich and warm. "Best offer I ever made," he declared, his blue eyes meeting Abigail's with the same love they had held from the beginning. "And the best decision she ever made, accepting it." "No contest," Abigail agreed softly. As the afternoon stretched into evening, with shared meals and stories, with children bathed and tucked into bed, with the peaceful rituals of a life built on love and trust, Abigail reflected once more on the strange workings of fate. From abandonment to belonging, from heartbreak to healing, from a rain-soaked platform to a sun-drenched ranch, her journey had been unexpected but perfect in its outcome. Later, As she and Xavier stood on the porch watching the stars emerge in the vast Colorado sky, his arm around her waist and her head on his shoulder, Abigail felt the familiar surge of gratitude that had become part of her daily life. "Happy?" Xavier asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Completely," she assured him. "You?" His answer was in the way he turned her to face him, in the tenderness of his kiss, in the words he whispered against her lips, the same words he had first spoken at the harvest dance 5 years before, words that had only grown truer with time. "I love you, Abigail Blackwood, with all that I am and all that I have." And as they stood together under the star-filled sky, their children sleeping peacefully inside the home they had built, their future stretching before them like the endless prairie, Abigail knew that she had found far more than she had ever dreamed possible on that rainy day when a stranger had offered her a place in his wagon and ultimately in his heart.